I'm going to talk to you about the different types of feature stories that you might do for your final story. As most of you know, on your final story, you're going to choose the type of story you want to do. So you can choose to do another personality profile. You remember from your first story that these are an in-depth look at an individual, typically someone who's interesting because of who they are or what they've done or are doing. If you remember in class, we read the story about Nigel turned the car away from the ocean. He was almost home now. He hit the gas, and the car roared up the two-lane road, blurring past houses and parked cars and the turned heads of startled walkers. Higher and higher, faster and faster, as if speeding toward a ramp that would launch him. So you remember that section from his story. That was a personality profile example. So, business profile, you also are familiar with. This highlights a business, focuses on the newsworthy aspects, the goals, remember the goals, obstacles, achievements, logistics, all of these areas that we talked about that you could possibly write about in a business. An example of the business profile, if you remember, the orange is the new peach story that we read. That was a business profile, and of course, you did one for your second story. Okay, so some other types of stories include travel features. These are often written in first person and in past tense because you're obviously traveling and then writing about what happened. They focus on a place and the people that are in that place. They typically have a quest of some sort. So for you guys, travel stories might not be an option in terms of you might not be taking a trip that you can write about like overseas or something, but you may have an option for a travel story, say to Savannah. You may take a day trip to Savannah, and your quest might be to find, the best cup of coffee in Savannah, or to find, the richest piece of history, or I don't know what, but some quest, some purpose is usually involved in a travel story. There's something that you want to get out of it. Choose a small story within your travels, so don't try to cover everything that happens, even if you're covering just a day. Don't try to cover everything that happens. Consider the smaller parts, the anecdotes, especially for the lead. You want to have an anecdotal lead in a travel feature. You can include dialogue, and of course, you can always include dialogue in a feature story, but travel stories are especially good for this because if you have interactions with people, you can include the dialogue that you have, as you go through your travel. Chronology is a trap. This is a real problem for people who want to write travel stories, is that a lot of times students want to start with, I got on the plane, and then end with, I came back on the plane. And that's just too much of a story. Like I just said, you want to choose some small pieces, or even a small piece to highlight the whole trip, not starting at the beginning and going into the end. End with a change. Usually, because you start with a quest, you start with some kind of, goal that you're trying to meet. End with some kind of epiphany, some kind of change, or some kind of, oh, I'll never find the best cup of coffee in Savannah. You know what I mean? Or it was here all along, or whatever. So there's some kind of thing that happens as a result of a travel story. Few things to avoid. There's some real, like, heavy cliches that get used in travel writing. Avoid best kept secret, hidden gem, must see, boast, like the city boasts, 3 theaters, etc. This is one that I don't like in any writing. I don't like etc. or and more rather than being specific. I think it's a lazy way to write. So etc. you can avoid. Rustic is something that's kind of recently come into, our conversations as a way of talking about something kind of somewhat negative. It's kind of rustic, kind of a nice way to put negative to things. But it is kind of a cliche, and I would avoid it if I were writing. Here's an example. I'm just going to read you the first part of this. In front of the mosque, the rubbish heap steamed, and the children crawling over its stench shimmered like visions of angels. It was hard to distinguish anything in the waste other than the forms of the waste pickers. Anything with soft vegetable edges was oozing into a soup of discarded nappies and rotten food, though off to one side I could still see the shape of a dead puppy glistening like a burst fig. Okay, so that is really graphic and a good example of being very, detailed and descriptive. But it's not typical for a travel story. Typically, travel stories are not that challenging, but I put this in here because I kind of like that it's that challenging. I think it's a tough story to tell. Okay, another option that you'll be somewhat familiar with is the historical feature, which may shed light on some old story, as we saw in the Ghost of Emmett Till. It can debunk wrong popular beliefs, right? So it may retell what we understand the history to be. It can put a human face on history. So it can take something that that occurred and talk about the people who experienced it, okay? You can juxtapose the past with the present. So you can take an event in the past and look at it in terms of the present, or how they contrast each other. That's actually, in my opinion, one of the kind of easier ways to approach a historical feature story, is to take something that happened in the past and something that happened, currently, and talk about how they're different, essentially. Places problems of yesterday in present context, so it gives us the ideas of like what this means today. And again, I said the good example of that was the Ghost of Emmett Till. Gave us the information about the history from the perspective of several people who had experienced it. All right, an issue feature includes factual or informational data. It's basically looking at a social issue or a, just an issue of any kind that usually is controversial in some way. It addresses societal problems. So, for example, in this example, we've got I think it was a fire in Southern California, San Diego County, yeah, making everything look beige. And so the issue was this part having to do with, climate change. That's the big issue, is climate change. But then the kind of way to look at it was this issue of the beige plague, or in this one, we're talking about, this was a Black Lives Matter protest. So the issue of Black Lives Matter and what does that mean, and so you would interview people who have something to say on that issue. It uses individual stories to illustrate the larger issues. So again, like I said, you could interview people who have something to say, and that would kind of illustrate what you're trying to overall achieve. The goal is to get people to care about the issue. So it's, the idea is that it's an issue that you probably care about. A trend feature can be a little lighter, but timeliness is essential. Trends have to be now. They can't be a trend that happened, last year. This trend that I've got, this example here, is just the gray hair trend that we had for a while. Now, I don't know that you can make a whole feature story out of it, but you could certainly try. You could talk to people who've done it. You could talk to salon owners. You could talk to, I'm trying to think who you would talk to about the actual trendiness of it. I'm not sure I know on that one. But you use individuals as examples, okay? So you use people who are either involved in the trend or know something about the trend. The cost is often important because a lot of times this is stuff that, people get into, like, I keep thinking of frivolous ones, but things like sneakerheads, like how much money do they spend on their sneakers? They're widely sourced. So even though I've asked you for 3 sources for your feature story, I'm telling you for a trend story, you're going to need more than that, because you need multiple people to say, yes, this is a trend, in order to show that it's a trend. Here's an example of credit card dating. No, it's credit score dating. That's what it was. It's basically the idea that people were exchanging information about their credit scores in their dating, in their initial kind of dating process. So that was a trend that somebody saw and wrote a story about. Here's another one about men and body image, the obsessions with the gym. That's a trend, and that's more of a negative trend. A review feature is my last one I'm going to talk to you about, and this one probably isn't going to be an option for most of you, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about it because it might be something that you need to know in the future, or it might be something that you're able to do, but I'm going to put a twist on it that you're probably not going to like, so I'm just warning you. A review feature relies on technical understanding of the subject, so you need to really understand what you're writing about. If you're writing about, music, you have to have a good understanding of that area. For this class, a review feature includes interviews with participants. So if you do a review of one of the plays that we're doing at the university, then you could interview the people involved, and you could write a review of the play that included information from the people involved. Okay? Typically, a review does not necessarily write or have sources and quotes from the people involved, but that's what we're doing for this class. That's the component I'm putting in for this class. Partially just because I don't want you guys to go write features about, something that's completely disconnected and doesn't require sources. So review features require reputation for quality. They're news you can use. They're stuff that the customer, consumer can really, actually go out and use. This is the best place to, eat this meal. Typically, they're in third person, but some places write them in first person. Depends. Must draw a conclusion. So the whole point of a review is to tell the reader this is good or this is bad, right? So you have to do that. You can't just meander and describe. It may include things like music, movies, theater, video games, TV shows, events, restaurants, possibly other options, but I'm not going to say etc. here because I don't like that. So we're just going to say may include, and then if something's left off the list, it's okay. All right, that is, oh no, I have a review of Our Town here as an example. Our Town's been read by countless high school and college students and performed on stage, screen, and television many times. It won the Pulitzer Prize. Da Vinci said that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. The company is heeding that axiom, for the often affecting production is stripped of all frills, complex sets, or props. As Wilder indicated, theater schools would call the play non-illusionistic, presentational drama. Most of us would call it a depiction of small-town life that has gentle but insistent metaphysical urgings. We're concerned with the eternity of something. Okay, so that's a little bit in your head kind of a review, but you get the idea of what we're talking about here. And I'll point out for you guys that we do have somebody who's done a lot of reviews in our class. So if you're interested in knowing more about reviews, you might want to talk to Justin because he's somebody who's actually written and had some published. Maybe some of the rest of you had too. I'm sorry that we're not in class to talk about this, but hopefully this presentation has helped you get a sense of what your options are for the final story, which you're pitching on Monday. All right. Thanks, guys. Oops.